If you didn't already know it, Hyundai is now the second best-selling EV brand in the United States, and they're not resting on their laurels. For 2025, they've given their most popular EV, the Ioniq 5, a bit of a nip tuck, and this new XRT model, which is, a little bit more off-roady than the rest of the Ioniq 5 lineup. Let's take a look. A lot of the changes that we see on this XRT model are going to apply to the rest of the Ioniq 5 lineup, although clearly not the visual changes on the outside like the black bumpers and the red recovery hooks that we find on this XRT model. Hyundai is calling this the most capable Ioniq 5 that they've ever built in terms of off-road capability, but clearly that's a relative statement because something like the Hyundai Santa Cruz is probably going to still be a little bit better off-road. Now up front, in addition to the recovery hooks, we get a different interpretation of the bumper that we find in the rest of the Ioniq 5 lineup. Kind of this pixel theme camo setup. I'm not quite clear how I feel about that. It's a little interesting looking. It kind of looks 3D printed, although it's not. That's just the texture going on. And then we have these pixel elements down here at the bottom of the bumper. We still have the air intakes there for the cooling system. And of course, we still have these very distinctive pixel LED headlights with these really interesting square rings there. Now moving out from there, you'll notice that most of the Ioniq 5 actually looks about the same as before. It still has that grown-up hatchback vibe to it. It's definitely bigger than something like a Volkswagen Golf, even though it kind of has that hatchbacky shape to it. We have that same camo-themed cladding around the wheel arches, but interestingly enough, if I zoom out from there, we don't find it on the sills or on the doors. So that's more of a traditional matte plastic there, and then more of that camo in the back. Of course, we have unique wheels in this model. They wanted to kind of go after the classic sort of steel wheel look. These are alloys, but they have kind of that square pixel theme going on there. Moving around the back, we have a dramatically restyled rear end for the XRT trim. The rest of the lineup, it's actually pretty similar to what we saw before. Now, they say that the bumpers are not just about the appearance, they also improve the approach and breakover and departure angles for the vehicle just a little bit, but it's hard to tell exactly how much. We don't get too much of a clearance increase there. They say that the suspension has been bumped up by a little bit less than an inch, but that doesn't necessarily translate to additional ground clearance. In the back, I'm not quite sure how I feel about this body-colored section insert right there in the middle because there's a lot of black plastic around. We get the XRT logo embossed in that section, those pixel tail lights above there, and the Ioniq 5 logo in the middle, but more importantly, every version is going to get a rear wiper. This is something that we saw in the Korean market, Ioniq 5, and indeed it is making it to North America. So be sure to let me know what you think about the exterior design of this XRT trim. One thing worth noting is that they said the final version will have a completely black spoiler. So this top wing that's body colored in this version is actually going to be black in the final version. Let's take a look at the inside because every trim also gets some updated interior tweaks. Starting out on the driver's side door, we have more of that pixel camo theme going on there and the XRT logo, of course. You'll find that XRT logo and this design on all four doors actually. The rest of the interior, it is largely what we saw in the pre-refreshed Ioniq 5, but there are a few changes if I go ahead and hop inside. The biggest one is the software package. So we get the latest infotainment software from Hyundai, and that includes, of course, the new little button down there which allows you to change that orange USB-C input from a charge-only port to an interface port. And then they've also relocated the wireless charger because this is going to support wireless smartphone projection as well. Of course, we have the big LCD over here on the driver's side still. Same software design pretty much right there. And we don't find a fingerprint reader over here like we find in some Hyundai vehicles. Most of this interior has not changed for 2025, but there are still some important changes to talk about. For instance, the infotainment system now runs the latest Hyundai software. You can tell that by the design of the software and the fact that it supports wireless smartphone projection, Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, etc. There are some subtle changes to the other screens. For instance, the EV screen, it's not exactly the same. Things have been restyled in addition to that added capability to the hardware and the software. And then we do see some control changes as we continue through the interior. Down here we have air vents for the driver and front passenger, the EV start-stop button, controls for the infotainment system, touch buttons for a lot of the climate control functions. Below the climate controls, we have this switchable USB input. That's a feature we find in other and recent Hyundai models. It allows you to switch that port between a charge-only port and an interface port. I apologize for the graininess of the image. It's really, really dark in here, and this is a very black interior. There's also a little storage cubby right there. If we move over to the center console, don't worry, we still have a sliding center console. I know some folks were worried that that might abandon abandon the regular Ioniq 5 because in the Ioniq 5N, it's a fixed console, but that's not what's happened. It is redesigned, however, so we have some physical buttons here for the ventilated seats, heated steering wheel, 360-degree camera, all that jazz. Big Qi wireless charging mat there. Two big cup holders over there. We still have one of my least favorite keys, unfortunately. You can see that even though this is actually a pretty new key, it already has a few scratches on it. I really wish Hyundai would update that particular design. Then there's a padded center console with a small storage area right inside, and then you can flip that up and have access to even more storage in this under area here. And then we have some USB charge ports right down there. You can barely see those little LEDs. The rest of the interior, it's basically the same as before. The interior design has not functionally changed much here. So we still have basically the same ambient lighting designs. Things have been tweaked ever so subtly here and there. We still have the same big glove compartment over there on that side, sort of a bin and slot style compartment. The seat designs, those are basically the same as well. So in this particular model, we have the XRT logo embossed on that seat back, but basically the same design and same interior theme that we found before. The steering wheel, it's one of Hyundai's more recent designs with sport grips up top and a little bit of a flat bottom right there, but it's not the most aggressive flat bottom steering wheel I've ever seen. You'll find controls for the adaptive cruise control system over here on this side, the 4 dots right there in the middle of the airbag cover. I am surprised that they don't light up in this model. And then on this side, we find controls for the infotainment system. Now, if you were hoping the XRT would bring along a spare tire, well, you are going to be a little bit disappointed. Under the load floor, we still have the same tire mobility kit that we had before, and then we still have this somewhat awkward hump right here in the middle of the cargo area. I wish that some of the electronics that we find in the vehicle, most notably that subwoofer right there, had been relocated to give us a slightly more practical storage area like we find in, for instance, its platform mate, the EV6, but that doesn't happen for 2025.
Hold on to your hats, guys. There is one extra piece of information for the 2025 Ioniq 5. This is going to be the first non-Tesla produced with a native J3400 port, also known as the North American Charging Standard, or NACS. Yep, a native Tesla charge connector on a vehicle that is not a Tesla. Honestly, I had expected this to come from Ford or General Motors first, but the Ioniq 5 is currently in production in the United States. Exactly when those vehicles will actually find their way to dealer lots, I don't know. But yep, for 2025, every Ioniq 5 sold in the US is going to have the new connector. Now, the reason I'm filming this portion in the studio is because it took me a while to digest the ramifications of this. Remember, the Ioniq 5 is still an 800-volt nominal EV. And this means, rather unfortunately, everybody's going to be using adapters for a while. And if you want to get the fastest charge time out of your Ioniq 5, you will need a CCS to NACS adapter. And that's going to look something right like this. Basically, the adapters that we find already available for Tesla products so that way they can charge at Electrify America stations or EVgo stations, etc. The reason you're going to want one of these is because most supercharger stations out there are actually not going to charge the Ioniq 5 terribly quickly. If you want to go 0% to 100% in 40 minutes, or 10% to 80% in 18 minutes, you're going to want one of these, and you're going to want to hunt down an EA station. Because if you go to the Tesla supercharger station and you plug your vehicle in, the voltage conversion from 400 volts up to the 800 volt nominal systems that we find in the Ioniq 5, Ioniq 6, etc., it's really going to stretch out your charge time. And yeah, I know they're not actually 800 volt EVs. They're somewhere in the 600 volt range. We're talking about these two different worlds, 400 volt, 800 volt systems, and the relative compatibility issues that we find out there on the market. Longer term, this is going to be a fantastic thing for these EVs, though, because it's going to mean easier access to NACS chargers or J3400 chargers all the way around the United States. And of course, super easy access to the Tesla supercharging network. But in the short term, it's going to mean slower charging speeds if you choose to use the Tesla supercharger on your Ioniq 5, the V3 stations there. And it's going to mean you're probably going to need adapters everywhere because most of the CCS stations out there just have the CCS connector. We will be seeing some CCS, NACS, J3400 stations coming at some point in the United States. They're just a very few number right now, but more should be coming soon.
Let me know what you think about all that, and did Hyundai do enough with the updated 2025 Ioniq 5? Should they have gone a little bit further on the off-road front to maybe compete a little bit more with those upcoming small Rivian models? Or do you think this is just about the right amount of off-roadiness? You know, it's not going to be the most rugged off-road EV available, but To be honest, I don't see too many people taking their EV further off the beaten path, at least yet, because we don't find too much charging infrastructure out there in the back of Beyond. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and we'll see all of you later.